You think you know Alice in Wonderland. A curious little girl falls down a rabbit hole into a whimsical world of talking animals, mad tea parties, nonsensical riddles, and a grinning Cheshire Cat. A delightful children's fantasy full of imagination, absurdity, and dreamlike adventures. A timeless classic written by Lewis Carroll, often remembered as pure, innocent nonsense for kids. But the story you've been told is a heavily sanitized version that hides horrors far darker than any rabbit hole. Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, Lewis Carroll, didn't write a simple bedtime tale in 1865. He created a cultural bomb disguised as fantasy, a biting, subversive indictment of Victorian England's most poisonous secrets: rampant opium addiction in nurseries, industrial poisoning of workers, arbitrary and brutal justice, rote education that crushed curiosity, and the shadowy personal obsessions that led his own family to destroy parts of his diaries forever. Today, we're tumbling down the real rabbit hole to uncover the disturbing historical context, the coded social critiques, the real-life tragedies encoded in every chapter, and the terrifying questions that still linger about Carroll himself. Once you understand what the eat me and drink me potions really mirrored in Victorian homes, why the Mad Hatter was no joke, what the Queen of Hearts executions echoed, and why those missing diary pages were burned, you'll realize this was never just a children's book. It was an exposé wrapped in riddles, a scream against a society gone mad, preserved in nonsense so it could survive where plain truth would have been crushed. Let's begin. The story's public origin seems innocent enough. July 4th, 1862. Charles Dodgson, an Oxford mathematics lecturer and photographer, takes three Liddell sisters, Lorena, Alice, and Edith, on a rowing trip down the River Thames. 10-year-old Alice begs for a story. Dodgson improvises a tale about a girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole. He later writes it out as a Christmas gift for her in 1864, expands it, and publishes Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in 1865 under the pseudonym Lewis Carroll. It becomes an instant sensation, but the cracks appear almost immediately. When Dodgson dies in 1898, his family does something extraordinary and chilling. They go through his private diaries and deliberately cut out and destroy entire pages, especially those covering the crucial years 1863 to 1864, when he was closest to Alice Liddell and writing her story. Scholars have pieced together that at least 4 entire pages, possibly more, were removed, likely burned in the family fireplace. The surviving entries show abrupt gaps, with Dodgson's handwriting stopping mid-sentence before jumping forward. Why would his own sisters and nieces commit such an act of erasure? What was written there that was so devastating it could not be allowed to survive? Dodgson had unusually intense friendships with many prepubescent girls. He photographed them, often in artistic poses, sometimes nude, wrote them elaborate letters, took them on outings, and created personalized stories. In Victorian society, where strict propriety governed every interaction, these relationships raised quiet concerns even among his contemporaries. Without those missing pages, the exact nature of his feelings for Alice Liddell remains forever foggy. But the destruction itself speaks volumes. Whatever was there was explosive enough to warrant permanent obliteration by his own family. When Dodgson expanded the private tale into a public book, he didn't just add whimsy, he deliberately injected darker, more disturbing elements that were absent from the original riverboat version. The Duchess's baby that turns into a pig, the Mad Hatter's eternal tea party, the chaotic trial. These weren't random nonsense. They were surgical strikes against Victorian society's ugliest truths. Start with Alice's constant consumption of mysterious substances. She eats a cake labeled Eat Me and drinks from a bottle labeled Drink Me, causing her to grow huge or shrink tiny. In the 1860s, this was no psychedelic fantasy inspired by later 1960s counterculture. It was a direct mirror of everyday Victorian life. Opium was in nearly every household. Laudanum, liquid opium, was sold over the counter without prescription. It was given to babies to quiet them. Godfrey's cordial, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, and dozens of other soothing remedies were marketed specifically for infants. Mothers dosed crying babies with teaspoons of opium-laced syrup so they could work 14-hour shifts in factories. Coroners' reports from the 1850s to 1860s are filled with cases of accidental infant poisoning, blue lips, cold bodies, death-ruled misadventure. The Duchess's baby in the book transforms grotesquely. Its eyes shrink, its nose becomes a snout, it turns into a pig. Contemporary medical journals described opium-sickened infants as shrunken into little old men, with distorted features and failure to thrive. Carroll didn't invent this horror, he documented it. The potions and cakes aren't playful magic. They are a coded condemnation of mothers and society literally poisoning the next generation for convenience and profit. Then comes the Mad Hatter. The phrase mad as a hatter wasn't whimsical invention. It described a real, horrific occupational disease ravaging England's hat-making industry. Hatters used mercury nitrate to process felt from rabbit fur. In poorly ventilated workshops, workers inhaled toxic vapors day after day. Symptoms: uncontrollable tremors, hatters' shakes, slurred speech, hallucinations, emotional instability, eventual insanity and death. Doctors documented it as early as the 1820s. French researchers confirmed the link in 1869. Yet the industry continued unchanged. Factory owners knew, the government knew, the public knew, hence the saying. But nothing was done until 1941, when mercury was redirected for wartime use. The Mad Hatter's erratic behavior, trembling hands, nonsensical riddles, and eternal tea party aren't random absurdity. They are Carroll's precise encapsulation of systemic indifference to working-class suffering, an entire character built around a slow, agonizing industrial murder that society chose to ignore. The Queen of Hearts, screaming "off with their heads" at every slight, seems like over-the-top caricature. But Victorian readers would have recognized the reference instantly. The gardeners frantically painting white roses red? That's a direct nod to the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, England's brutal civil war between the houses of Lancaster, Red Rose, and York, White Rose. Thousands died. Executions were common for simply wearing the wrong color emblem. In 1461 at Towton, the bloodiest battle on English soil, snow turned red with 28,000 dead. Prisoners were dragged from sanctuary and beheaded. The Queen's arbitrary death sentences echo centuries of English monarchs ordering executions on political whims. Carroll was telling his adult readers, "Your civilized system of justice is no different from a pack of playing cards ruled by a tyrant's mood." The trial scene at the book's end is pure chaos, meaningless evidence, reversed logic, justice dependent on the Queen's temper. This wasn't fantasy. Victorian courts were often arbitrary, especially for the poor. In 1856, a seamstress stole bread for her starving children and got 6 months' hard labor. She died of typhus in prison. That same week, an aristocrat's son assaulted a servant and was fined £1 and released with a gentlemanly warning. Newspapers barely noticed when Alice shouts, "You're nothing but a pack of cards!" She isn't just dismissing nonsense, she's voicing Carroll's ultimate truth. Beneath the pomp and ceremony, Victorian authority was fragile, arbitrary, and cruel. And the education system? Alice tries to recite her lessons in Wonderland and they collapse. 4 times 5 is 12. London is the capital of Paris. This mocks the rote memorization drilled into Victorian children, endless repetition of moral poems and facts with no understanding encouraged. Carroll, an Oxford mathematician, even sneaks in a joke about shifting number bases, a cutting-edge idea at the time, mocking his own academic world for pushing abstraction over real thought. Alice in Wonderland endures because it works on every level at once. Children see adventure and nonsense, adults see savage satire, historians see a coded map of Victorian England's darkest secrets: poisoned babies, poisoned workers, poisoned justice, poisoned minds. The burned diary pages ensure we'll never know the full truth about Carroll and Alice Little, but their destruction screams louder than any surviving word. Carroll didn't write a children's story. He wrote a revolutionary manifesto hidden just enough to slip past Victorian censors and into nurseries worldwide. The real magic isn't shrinking or growing, it's that he concealed devastating truths inside a little girl's confused dream, so sharp they would have destroyed him if stated plainly. The next time someone says Alice in Wonderland is just imaginative nonsense for children, remember? Sometimes the most powerful revelations can only be spoken through the mouth of a lost little girl in a world that makes no sense, because Victorian England made no sense either. It's not a fairy tale, it's a crime scene preserved in riddles, and the trial never really ended.